I have clicked onto the global tropical overview for June the 26th, 2024. As is always the case in these videos, the thought expression are mine alone, and in making any decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to the local office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we have our same two areas of interest in the Atlantic today. We have our tropical wave in the central Caribbean, which is now designated Invest 94L by the National Hurricane Center. This is going to be tracking west and may have a chance of development before it comes ashore in either Central America, Belize, or Mexico. We also have another tropical wave way out in the eastern tropical Atlantic, and the system will be tracking west over the next several days. And as we get into the weekend time frame in early next week, we may be seeing development of the system once it gets there and tracks towards the Windward Islands of the Lesser Antilles and North and South America. We're going to start off with Invest 94L here in the Central Caribbean. Here's the close-up visible loop of it, and you can see today it's starting to slow down a bit from its past couple of day forward motion. The past couple of days it's really traversed half of the Caribbean or more distance-wise overall. So very fast motion, but now it's reaching a part of the Caribbean where the trade winds are significantly slower than they are compared to the eastern Caribbean. And the wave is now entering its environment where it's going to be a little bit more favorable for tropical development. One thing that's going to go in its favor is as these trade winds slow down, as I talked about yesterday, they begin to cause a little bit of increased low-level convergence. That means that as they slow down, they're rising into thunderstorms, as you can see right now on the north side of the wave envelope, which is about like that. And once that happens, you get a lot more convection like this, and over time, this can help spin up an area of low pressure. Now, one thing that we'll have to continue to watch for is where does an area of low pressure actually develop within this main wave pocket? Does it develop on the north side of this, say along this convection near Jamaica? Does it form on the south side of this in the Southern Caribbean? And these will have very big implications on what happens for the future of our storm. If the system were to form a low on the south side of this, the current track forecast would put it right into Central America, right burying itself into high topography, and that would likely be really most of it for tropical development chances if it does that. However, if this area of convection here south of Jamaica were to focus into an area of low pressure, this is going to be swinging back towards the west and likely will stay north of Hispaniola, or not Hispaniola, I apologize, but Honduras here. And it may have more ocean time before it comes ashore into Mexico or Belize over the next few days. Now, one thing that's also going within its favor is an upper trough that is digging into the Caribbean. You can see it here on the water vapor loop pretty clearly. And this is bringing some shear to the system right now, but what it's also doing is it's feeding convection in the Southern Caribbean at this time, and also helping to feed some of the convection along the wave axis. And over time, this convection will be ballooning an area of high pressure aloft over top the wave, and that's going to be helping to fight away the trough, so that shear is going to go away. And by the time the system, if it does have a low pressure moving into the Western Caribbean north of Honduras, by the time you say have a low pressure here, you'll have a low shear environment with a ballooning area of high pressure aloft, and that, alongside the warm seaside temperatures, is a favorable configuration for tropical development. But of course, the question is, does it actually happen? And right now, it's really just real-time watching, and we're just going to have to see what this convective mass here on the northern side of the wave does. If it does, say, tomorrow or in the next 2 days, say by Friday, if we have an area of low pressure developed that's tracking north of Hispaniola, I'd say odds of development are fairly decent here for a tropical storm. But if that doesn't happen and we still, in a day or two, are talking about its organized massive thunderstorms on the northern side of the wave, then I'd say tropical development odds are going to remain fairly low, like they are right now. And there is an entire possibility here that this system never becomes a tropical storm and just buries itself within the land areas here in Central America and into Mexico. But one thing that's important is that if the system stays a wave or becomes a tropical storm, the impacts are going to remain the same pretty much regardless. If a tropical storm forms, you may get a little bit of increased wind impacts, particularly in Mexico and Belize. But in terms of rainfall impacts, they're not going to change in Central America and Belize and Mexico. We're going to still get a lot of heavy rainfall here, which unfortunately a lot of these areas do not need, as we just had 2 Central American gyres dump, in some cases, over 500 millimeters of rainfall. And that's a lot of rainfall. That's about 2 feet of rainfall for those in the US. And while this forecast from the GFS ensembles is not overly high, we're not talking about another foot or 2 of rainfall in this area. This is still half a foot of rainfall, which is about 100 to 150 millimeters of rainfall. And with the high topography, it does not take much to cause flooding issues, but also on top of that, we just had, again, some areas of 500 millimeters of rainfall, and it's not going to take much to cause a lot of flooding issues here. And the main point being, if this system does not become a tropical storm, or if it does, regardless, it's likely going to still be a significant rainfall event for the region. And you can see from the National Hurricane Center, this is their tropical weather outlook. They're giving this about a 20% chance of development as it comes towards the west-northwest. And that's generally what I'd say right now. I generally agree upon that. And like I said, if we do get to a point where we have an area of low pressure here north of Honduras, then I could see a reason to increase odds, potentially as well, because it may have a chance to go into the Bay of Campeche and develop there. But as of right now, odds are not too high. But we're not done in the Atlantic. We have yet another tropical wave to watch way out in the tropical Atlantic. You can see it on this map by the National Hurricane Center graphic. A moderate chance area of interest marked way out there. And you can see it here if we go to this loop here. This is just off the coast of Africa. So this is Africa, this is the Cabo Verde Islands, and this is the open tropical Atlantic. And our wave is just about here. You can denote this as we have southeasterly winds here on the eastern side of this convective mass, turning into northeasterly winds, denoting a wave axis about like that. Now, it's possible that there is actually an area of low pressure developing within this. You can see that we do have, like I said, with that wave pocket, those winds turning from more southeast to northeast. But we do have westerly winds on the south side of this. It's hard to say for sure. We don't have ASCAT passes to fully confirm it. So it's hard to say if this is actually a closed area of low pressure. One thing that may be happening is this may just be an illusion as part of the intertropical convergence zone flow. You can see if you look towards the equator, we have further southwesterly flow back there. And we have the easterly trade winds north of there. So this is the intertropical convergence zone. And the wave is sort of getting entangled right now within that. So it may just be part of the intertropical convergence zone. It may not actually be an area of low pressure. But one thing that has continued to catch my eye today is just how good the system looks so far compared to, let's say, models like the European had showed. This is the current analysis of 850 millibar vorticity or spin. So this is low-level spin, the same product I've showed several times yesterday on the GFS and the European. You can see that we have this compact area, compact ball here of vorticity along that wave pocket, and this is very close to what the GFS actually wanted for this time frame, if not even a little stronger than the GFS had even anticipated. And you'll remember that yesterday when the GFS had the strongest signature, it had a greater chance to develop once it got here towards the Leeward Islands, or not the Windward Islands, and the Lesser Antilles in South America. And now what we are seeing, and you can see this in the European model, which is right here. This is the past 2 runs of the European. It is starting to correct today to the GFS scenario, and you can see where the GFS is now having that more concentrated area of low pressure, and the European is now playing a bit of catch-up with it. So my guess was wrong yesterday if the GFS being a bit too aggressive. It appears the GFS is actually just about right today, and this does change things quite a bit, as you can imagine. Now that we have a more well-developed low right now, this does go in favor for tropical development later down the road in the western tropical Atlantic getting into the Caribbean. Reason being is that we're going to have a fairly favorable environment overall. You can see on this upper level wind plot from the GFS, we have, not usual for this time of year, but we have an area of high pressure draping across the entire tropical Atlantic. And for this wave, which is about here by this time, it's in a very favorable configuration with this upper high. And you can see we have this massive upper trough here. This is usually what shears apart these storms in this part of the season. But this flow is more so helping this upper ridge stay in a favorable configuration for our storm. And this is looking unusually favorable for the time of year for this low. You can also see the effect of the European trending closer to reality today. You can see that now we have on the model a tropical storm showing up here in about 5 days. This is next Monday, July 1st, and this now shows a tropical storm coming through the islands, the Windward Islands, say like Barbados, and through the southern Lesser Antilles Islands. And the GFS is also showing the same thing, having yet again a tropical storm, maybe a little bit further south, but same general area in the Windward Islands and near South America, maybe Trinidad and Tobago down there. And this is now good agreement from both models. When the GFS and the European are in agreement of something, you generally have a good chance of that actually happening in reality. To add more weight onto it, this is a GFS ensemble, so this is several members of the GFS. I believe the GFS has about 31 members, and this is all those members bundled into one map. And when you see these red numbers and orange blobs here, that's areas of low pressure. And in this case, this is a tropical storm being shown on many of these ensemble members, each different run of the GFS, and this is a pretty good agreement from the GFS ensemble that we may be seeing a chance of tropical development there. Looking towards the European, and this is the 6Z run. I'm not sure if the 12Z run is in yet, but 6Z was also pretty convincing. This is actually really good agreement for the European. Usually the European does go a bit weak on things. It tends to be a little bit more conservative on forecasting, and it can sometimes go too weak. But it looks like on this scenario, the European is actually going fairly strong and going in fairly similar ways to the GFS. And when you have agreement like this from the GFS and European ensembles, and now the deterministic runs of the GFS and European, that really tells you that this is now looking like a very real possibility that you may have tropical development from this. And as so, the National Hurricane Center has issued their tropical weather outlook, giving us now a 40% chance of development. Remember, yesterday they had no area of interest on this, so this is rapidly rised. And given current trends, I would expect this to continue to rise. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a high chance of development in the next couple of days from this wave, as it does look like the environment is going to favor this. And given current trends, with it being a little bit stronger than anticipated from the European, showing that the GFS is more right here, I think that we are going to likely see a tropical system form out of this. Now, this does have a little bit more implications when it does come through. Now, you see the pressure on here on this map from the GFS, 996 millibars. That's not overly strong, and it is correct that we're not going to be looking at, say, a major hurricane coming through here. It is still June and into early July. We don't expect that this time of year. But something to keep in mind is that we have a very high environmental pressure. So you can see in these ISO bars, these are the environmental pressure. That's 1020 millibars, 1018, 1016, and 1014. And the environmental pressure surrounding this storm is about 1014 millibars. That's fairly high for a tropical storm. And what that does is now, here's 1014 millibars and here's 996 millibars. This is a very steep pressure gradient between high pressure and low pressure. So what you're going to end up with is a very strong gradient of strong winds, tropical storm, maybe even hurricane force when it does come through. Think of Hurricane Elsa back in 2021. That system had a very high pressure coming through the Windward Islands, but thanks to the very strong pressure gradient from the high pressure up north, we actually had hurricane force winds in an island like Barbados when it came through, and it actually got to 80 miles per hour despite not having all too low of a pressure. And I did do some measurements, and this type of a pressure would be about a hurricane force if you translate that with this high pressure to low pressure gradient. That's something to note here for the Windward Islands, is that if the system does indeed form, which, like I said, I think this is looking more and more likely today, we may be looking at more of a significant impact here, much more than a regular tropical wave like it was looking like more yesterday. And alongside that, we could also get a lot of heavy rainfall spreading across this region, which could lead to some localized flooding issues. Now, some good news is that the trade winds are very strong this time of year, as you saw with 94L. And that's likely not going to have the system stalling over this area for all too long. So rainfall amounts will likely not be overly high, but we do have some higher topography in some of these islands, and that could lead to some localized flooding issues along those islands. Now, one more thing before I go, I want to sort of look at the long-range European as just a bit of a caution for what you're going to see, mainly today, if this does continue on these runs in the next couple of days on social media sites. So this is the European run. This is the afternoon or late morning run of the European, and this is showing a very scary sight. This is a strong hurricane on the model, and not something the European usually does. Like I said, the European usually goes weak. It never really goes this strong. But one thing to keep in mind is that this run is just one run of the model. And while certainly is this within the realm of possibility, I'd say yes. Never say never with the weather. But I'd say the most likely scenario is something that is extremely weak and does not ever get to this magnitude in the Western Caribbean. So if you're in areas like Jamaica, Cuba, Central America, Belize, and Mexico, and you're looking online and you're seeing plots like this from the European model showing a big, strong hurricane come through, just remember, this is one model run. This is not a forecast. This is just one run of the European that is likely going to change in the next cycle later today and later tonight. If this does become more of a distinct possibility for a strong hurricane to come through here as we go into next week, we'll talk about that at a later time, but it's important to stay tuned to reliable sources and not fall for, say any clickbait that may be on social media saying big major hurricane coming through the Caribbean next week. That is completely untrue, and there's a lot of environmental factors that can easily stop this from happening. One thing that will likely be a very big struggle for the system is the very strong trade winds in the Eastern Caribbean. You can see on the GFS that the system moves into the Central Caribbean and it actually begins to struggle and actually opens up into a wave here, it looks like, on the run as it comes through the Eastern and Central Caribbean thanks to the strong trade winds. And this is usual for what you see. Like I said yesterday, this is why this area is often said as the tropical cyclone graveyard. These trade winds usually just rip apart any storm that gets through there. And the GFS does show that happening. And you can see by, this is Wednesday night. So when the European had that strong hurricane in the Western Caribbean, it's just an open wave here on the run. And this, I think, is a much more likely scenario, a much more reasonable scenario to play out. Of course, never say never with the weather, like I just said. It's possible, within an entire realm of possibility, that this could happen. But realistically, for this time of year, remember, it's early July by this time. And we do not expect these type of storms to get that strong this time of year. This is not August, it's not September, it's June and July, and it's just not normal for this time of year. But we'll keep an eye on it. Like I said, if this does become more of a distinct possibility, we'll talk about that when the time comes. But just, again, as a word of warning, if you see this online, don't take it too seriously. It's one model run. It's not truth. It is not what's actually going to happen. It's just a model run from the European model. That's all that I've got for today. I'll have more videos throughout the rest of this week on both of our systems here in the Atlantic. Stay safe in Central America, Mexico, and Belize as 94L pushes through the region. Hopefully the rainfall is not too bad there. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching.